the first day of October, October 1st, 2019. I'm Dave Lochran and Sal Vetri on the NFL Strategy Show, sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. What we do every Tuesday, we take a look at salaries for the first time for the upcoming week. We'll hit you with snap counts, targets, shares, touches, and a whole lot more. Make sure that we get you prepared and really close the book on the previous week and try and apply it to week 5. If you missed any of yesterday's show with Manny, Laura, and myself, we recapped all of the big winners from week 4, how they did it, and decisions and improvements to make going forward. You can check that out at youtube.com/awesomeo. But for now, Sal, how are you, man?
How's it going, man? Yeah, I'm pretty good. Fun week 4, and we were just talking before the show, week 5. It seems like running back's going to be a really, really tough spot to kind of see who you like the most there. So I'm excited to break it down, take this first look, look through these salaries and see what we can come up with to start the process.
Yes, sir. Let's see here, making sure we got everything good. Showing that I'm offline. Let me make sure we're not. Having the streaming software has been a serious pain in the ass lately.
I have it up on my phone, and right now we're still going, but I know it's on a delay.
Yeah, we'll see here. Yep. All right, we're good. Just wasn't popping up on Restream. We are good to go. How did week 4 go for you?
Yeah, week 4 was my best week yet. It was really strong. I play primarily most of my action in 3 max and single entries, and I had 100% Wayne Gallman. So seeing his first half was just music to my ears, I guess. So week 4 went good. And then, I guess kicking myself, and really like the biggest takeaway I have for it in terms of like what to kind of take and learn from was probably Chris Godwin, just kind of overweighting the Wednesday, Thursday injury report. And then really not on my fault and really my side of it, not looking into just Saturday transactions, seeing if they're bringing up any receivers, which they didn't. So I would say that's like the biggest takeaway that I had was really just that Matthew Stafford kind of overreacting to some of that later injury news, game time decision type stuff, got me off of a Kenny Galladay play. But for the most part, a pretty solid week going into even last night's showdown. So it was pretty cool.
All right. And we're going to jump into salaries in just a moment here. What are your initial thoughts on any injuries from the previous week? Anything that stands out to you, whether it be, Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky, not necessarily all of them being huge injuries, but certainly applicable from a fantasy sense. Devontae Adams with turf toe, didn't practice yesterday. We'll wait for word on him. Of course, A.J. Green isn't expected back anytime soon. Deshaun Jackson still hasn't practiced. Those are just a few names to throw out there. Anything stand out that we should be monitoring heading into week 5?
Yeah, you touched on a couple of the big ones, the quarterbacks for sure. You saw, though, when Daniels came in for Trubisky, he was just keying in on Allen Robinson and Javon Wims. All of his targets were going to those 2 players, so maybe some upside there. But, yeah, Devontae's the big one. You have MVS and Geronimo Allison for Green Bay. Jimmy Graham became a primary target of Aaron Rodgers once Devontae left for the remainder of that 4th quarter. And I think Marlon Mack is somebody to keep an eye on throughout the week. He was never ruled out medically, they're saying. But he left that game and did not come back, I believe, with a lower body leg injury. And then something that happened last night, John Ross leaves the game with an injury. You had Auden Tate last week, ran the 12th most routes. Obviously very game flow dependent last week, but he was also running routes week 3, led the team in targets. If he's out, he'll be the primary number 2 receiver in a very good spot. So monitoring John Ross. Lots of injuries happen, lots on the defensive side. Tyrone Smith is unlikely to play, which gives a little bit of a bump down for Zeke, but the matchup is still pretty good. I would say there's a lot going on. I have a whole spreadsheet up right now of all these injuries, but those are some of the main priority ones, I guess you can say. Some teams on bye going to get healthier. Albert Wilson supposedly supposed to come back, and then Rashad Penny coming back, but that's not something that's going to affect the main slate. So I would say watch the Packers passing game with Devontae. Keep an eye on John Ross, which will maybe be a little bit more under the radar. And then those quarterback plays will affect for sure their teams. It doesn't seem like Darnold's going to suit up either. Jamal Williams is also important. He's in the concussion protocol for Aaron Jones overall, just taking probably majority of the snaps, far majority if he's out.
Yeah, that is definitely something to monitor as well. He got smoked early in that game, and it was obviously a horror show after that hit, just laying there basically lifeless. So in concussion protocol, very unlikely that he returns this week. I don't see any way it happens. But you know what? We've seen crazier things. Aaron Jones just been wildly inefficient on the ground. Look, it's fair to point out that Philadelphia's run defense is really good. Denver's is good enough. Chicago's is probably the best in the league. But, I mean, all in all, do you see this as a spot where Aaron Jones should be targeted if Williams is out?
Yeah, if Williams is out, I think it's a good spot for Jones. Yes, last week was just the exact opposite of what LaFleur wants to do in terms of Rodgers throwing 50-plus times, but that's just the way that game turned out. But Jones led all running backs last week in routes run. He saw a ton of targets, caught 6 balls, very game flow dependent. But if Williams is out, you could probably project Aaron Jones for around 4 to 5 targets. And he's being very active, used as a receiver in the receiving in the pass catching game as well. I think he's a good play, especially when you factor in price point at the $5,900 price. If instead of seeing maybe 50% of the snaps, you're going to get a bump up with only Dexter Williams behind him to probably close to 75, 80%. Dexter Williams in the preseason, LaFleur was probably the guy that he was hard on the most in terms of just fumbling and issues with protection. So I would see a really big snap increase here if it's just Dexter Williams behind Aaron Jones. So I think he's definitely in play. But yeah, I mean, the main thing for this week at running back is what do you do at the top end?
Yeah, and there's a lot there. We'll get into it, but we'll start with quarterback first. Lamar Jackson, the highest priced quarterback on the slate this week on DraftKings. I mean, he's definitely come back down to earth a bit from an efficiency standpoint and from a ability to win games perspective. I mean, against Kansas City, that game looks closer than it was. And against Cleveland, they got smoked. But his floor has been wild, just really, really high due to, of course, his ability to run and score with his legs. So it's really tough to rule him out ever. I will say this much, though. This is a Pittsburgh defense that I don't think is nearly as good as they were, last season or season prior to that. But with Minkah Fitzpatrick, a decent enough pass rush as we saw yesterday. Also, in conjunction with a god-awful Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. I'm surprised Andy Dalton didn't just get up and quit, just walk off the field. I mean, that was outrageous. But I think, obviously it's an exploitable spot. But Pittsburgh's defense, again, I don't think they're as bad as they were made out to be early on, especially with the addition of Fitzpatrick. What do you make of Lamar Jackson if you have to pay a premium for him here?
Yeah, I've been playing Lamar every single week, and I'll probably still have shares of him. But yeah, I am somebody who's probably higher on Pittsburgh's defense as well. A lot of things are going to be skewed, especially just small sample of 4 games and Minkah not being there for half of them, Hayden being hurt, Watt being hurt. So I think this is a spot that the guy just has a totally high floor. The running game is always going to be there for him. Garbage time kind of saved him this past week with a touchdown late in that one against a prevent defense. So 7,100 is steep to pay for. He's not like a yes right now for me. He's sort of listed as like a second tier option. So I'd say that's where I'm at. It's just the price tag is getting to a point where it's harder to play him, and that's definitely in cash. But when it comes to GPPs, he's just going to keep having lower ownership the higher the price gets. And we saw last week he goes for over 25 fantasy points again with sort of ease, just due to the fact that he can put in 7, 8 on the ground in fantasy points like it's nothing. So I think it's a little bit of a tougher matchup, but I think also due to that, they're going to have to rely on just him more and his dual threat ability.
Yeah, and plus pairing him is doable. I think we could probably rule out the notion that, you have to run naked Lamar Jackson every week now because, Marcus Brown is still somebody that, despite 2, again, inefficient games from him, he's still getting targeted. He still has 16 targets over that span. He's still heavily featured in the offense, and I think that's at least reason to consider somebody like Lamar Jackson, especially knowing that we've seen Marquise Brown snap counts rise from 18% to 65 to 75 to 81. Meanwhile, Mark Andrews is hovering around that, 45, 50 range. But we can get to them in a little bit. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the position, though, Sal. Deshaun Watson, man, the line not being able to hold up has really been a killer. And I was surprised when I saw his adjusted completion percentage on deep passes, right? Because you would really think that Will Fuller would be putting up better numbers, especially with teams doubling DeAndre Hopkins. But it hasn't been the case. I don't know if we're going to see a turnaround from Deshaun Watson unless they get that offensive line fixed or unless they do something dramatically different with the play calling, or maybe a matchup with Atlanta will be enough to remedy those troubles.
Yeah, I have Deshaun Watson right now as a yes, and somebody I have interest in at the price tag. I mean, last week probably the point that made me the most sick in my stomach was watching live. Will Fuller probably wide open by like 5 steps, just be missed on a 75-yard touchdown by Watson. He did something similar with Hopkins in that game. So these guys are getting separation. They're getting open. I mean, they're good receivers on the field nonstop. There's just the line issues, like you said, although I somewhat don't like those line issues in terms of keeping him healthy and upright. But when he's outside of the pocket and scrambling, he's very dangerous. And that's what happened on the deep Will Fuller just missed touchdown. But for this week, I think it's a really good spot. We saw Mariota be very effective last week in the whole Titans offense against this defense. Nothing has changed for Atlanta on the defensive end, and they just keep getting hit with injuries. It happened last year. Reminds me of the Eagles and their secondary, just continuing to get hit with injuries all over the place on defense. So Watson's definitely in play. I would prefer on the top end Watson to Jackson in either format, cash or GPPs. I just love the dual threat upside out of those guys. Draftkings is, I would say, maybe not finally, but starting to realize just pricing these guys up is smart because they have legit 5-point upside every single week, just minimum on the ground. So I like the matchup against Atlanta, and Watson's somebody right now that is ranked as a top 5 quarterback for me as of Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah, look, he has one of the highest ceilings of any quarterback. It's just his floor has been really low this season. And like you said, the rushing floor, like generally speaking, it should really do you a lot of favors. But I do think that this is one of those matchups that'll benefit him greatly. If you look at all 4 teams that he's faced this year, I think we could agree Carolina's defense looks legit. The Chargers, they're better in the secondary, but still a decent team that'll make life tough, especially in coverage, give the defense an easier or longer time to get to the quarterback. And then Jacksonville and the Saints. This is certainly the best matchup he's going to get against a smaller defensive front for the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's just things that have to come together. I mean, if he hits one of those deep passes that were literally wide open for 2 players,
right,
it's a totally different week for him. So he's still a fine player, and the line's an issue, but it's been like that for 2 years of his career. So I really like this spot for him, and I'm just trying not to react too much last week. And also, the rushing upside, it's just keeping him alive right now. If anything, if he can just get some sort of time and rhythm on offense in the passing game, he's going to be exactly as dangerous and really pay off that price tag.
And he is top 5 in deep pass percentage, not completion percentage, but attempted passes, which I like to see. Right, he's attempted 18 deep passes already. 19.5% of his passes are 20+ yards, and his adjusted completion percentage. Get this. It's the second highest among all starting quarterbacks at 72.2%. So that's got to be somewhat encouraging.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like things that are just due for regression in a very small sample.
Talk to me about guys like Brady and Murray. Winston, I'm not particularly high on this week. Sure, they racked up 55 yards against the Rams, 48 of them being on offense. But I do think this is a very difficult matchup for him. And I think what you could see happening is just as Dallas wasn't able to establish the run game with a very good running back, as much as I think Ronald Jones is decent and will take over this offense, we'll get to that later. I think they'll have a very tough time moving the ball on the ground. And that'll translate into more struggles for Winston, probably some rushed passes and interceptions. I actually like the Saints defense here. But among the guys above 6K, we've got Dak Prescott, Rodgers, Wentz, Winston, Murray, and Brady that we haven't discussed yet. 3 of them I have some interest in. What about you?
Yeah, I would say that range is exactly where I'm at right now. I have interest in Brady, Murray, and Wentz in that 6K range right now. And just starting with Brady, I mean, he's just not getting touched in the pocket right now. That line is just fantastic. He has all the time in the world, and it's a team that's in the red zone a lot. And maybe somewhat surprisingly, with the amount of running backs that they have and Sony Michel's role in this team, especially in the red zone, was expected to be very high. But they're passing a ton. I mean, he has over 20 red zone attempts so far, and that's in games where they're just blowing out teams, which is another possible in this game. But facing just a pass rush that's not much there in Washington against a really good line. He's playing fantastic this year in terms of DR, second highest on the slate, only behind Dak. So I like Brady at that price point. I do like to lean to a little bit more mobile quarterback, so I probably like, for slight savings, Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray, I mean, he hasn't been putting it all together for 2 straight weeks now in terms of the first 2 weeks was getting it done in the passing game. Last 2 weeks, getting it done more so on the ground. The second he puts that all together, he's right there in terms of how productive Deshaun Watson can be in a mid-20s fantasy point day, if not higher. And it doesn't come any better than the matchup he'll get this week. We saw last night Mason Rudolph take advantage of that. You get a Bengals team that, in terms of just overall pressure rate, not much there in terms of coverage. Bottom 2 in the league, only next to Miami on Pro Football Focus right now. So, yeah, Kyler Murray at $6,300, just this spot overall, 23 red zone attempts so far in the year. And that's something as well that he has a lot of attempts, and they're just not cashing in on them. A sub 60% completion percentage in the red zone. That's due for, I would say, some sort of regression, especially as a young kid, just making a couple starts in the NFL. And then Wentz would be the third one. Right now, I have Wentz as my favorite play on the slate against the Jets. He's going to get potentially Deshaun Jackson.
Hold on, back up. Wentz is your top quarterback right now?
As of right now, I have Wentz as number 1, yes.
Okay. I don't think Deshaun Jackson will be back. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but let's just give me the scenario if he is and isn't back, just since it's early in the week.
Yeah, definitely. So if Deshaun Jackson's not back, he probably bumps down to number 2 for me. On Tuesday, if he's back, he would be number 1. You're going to get a healthier Alshon here. Wentz as well, similar to Tom Brady, has just not been touched in terms of his, we saw last week against a number 1 coming into that week, Packers pass rush, doesn't get sacked. Lots to like in terms of just overall team total of 29 coming into this one. And it's just a spot that I want to take advantage of this Jets secondary. And for a $6,100 price tag, I don't think he has to do too much in terms of if you get 20 points out of Wentz this week, you feel really confident about that. And just overall what's happening there in the backfield coming along a little bit better now, and what's happening in the passing game another week healthier for Alshon. I do like it. And you saw last week Zach Ertz was getting less double teams with Alshon coming back, which is just going to make it easier to move the ball overall.
Yeah, now it's only 3 weeks into the season for the Jets, who've had a bye already. But they rank, according to Pro Football Focus, dead last in pass rush and 6th in coverage. Here's the thing. If you give Carson Wentz a clean pocket, even if you don't, but you give him a clean pocket, he's going to make passes, or he's going to complete passes. Where do you think this Jets defense settles in by the end of the year in terms of coverage and pass defense? Because it's only 3 weeks into the season. Based on their personnel, what do you see?
I would expect it at best to be sort of a middle of the pack defense.
Okay.
I mean, you have Adams in the secondary, who's going to be one of the better safeties in the entire league. But outside of that, I'm not too sold on what they have at cornerback still. And you're definitely going to get some sort of regression if these players are actually good in the secondary. But I'm not too sold on it all that much. And especially if you're not generating pressure, that's just going to hurt even more and put more pressure on your secondary, especially once you start facing more quality quarterbacks in more pass-friendly scripts for them.
I have Wentz written down as somebody I definitely like. But for me, personally, it comes down to Deshaun Jackson. I just think he makes an astronomical difference on how this offense functions. We saw it in week 1, but you don't need more than 1 week to know that a guy like Deshaun Jackson can completely change a way a defense plays the opposing team. And as we saw last week, Jordan Howard with 3 touchdowns. One of them was a receiving touchdown, but they ran the hell out of the ball. They exposed Green Bay's offense, particularly up the middle. And this is an Eagles squad that I forget the numbers, Sal, but I think when they rush for over 100 yards in a game, they're like 24-3. And when they rush for under 100 yards in a game under Peterson, they're 1-13, I think. So they need to get the ball going on the ground. But Deshaun Jackson just makes everything easier if he's there. So that's something we need to pay close attention to as we draw closer to Sunday. And I think all of your points I agree with on Kyler Murray. I will point out, though, that, and I tweeted this earlier, Mason Rudolph had an ADOT of 3 last night, right? 3. Lowest of any quarterback on the week. 17 of his passing attempts, or 17 of his targets went to running backs. 17 of 30 went to running backs. 8 to Samuel, 8 to Connor. I thought it was actually a really well-designed offense and play calling, trying to build it, kind of direct the offense around him and make him comfortable. That is what they did. But even if that's the case, and it was a dink and dunk offense outside of that one pass to Williams, this is still a Cincinnati Bengals defense that we've seen get exposed deep countless times this season already, Sal. So that's not something I'm worried about.
Yeah, and it's the defense also that just dating back to last year, it seemed like through 2-3 weeks, maybe they were getting some sort of run stop, but that all just fell apart. And just dating back to last year, giving up receptions, pass catching running backs, and you have for Kyler Murray as even more now of a team that's just throwing really just short in general to slot receivers and not really going down the field, more of horizontal passing. David Johnson's running the most routes in the league with tied still for back-to-back weeks with McCaffrey. I think that's only going to help even more in terms of just the upside that Kyler Murray has in this game against a team that, we saw get shredded in that exact manner last week for running backs that are probably a tier below him.
Okay, so most of the top quarterbacks for me this week, and it's still very early. Many things are subject to change, but that's why we do the strategy show Monday through Saturday. Most of them for me are above 6K that I really like. We've had a few weeks this season, especially week 3, where cheap quarterbacks were really the way to go. This week, you have guys like Rivers against Denver. You have Cousins against the Giants. And maybe we see some squeaky wheel getting the grease with Thielen and Diggs being upset about the volume of passes. But at the same time, do you need to do that if Dalvin Cook's going to be able to carve up this Giants run defense? We'll see. Teddy Bridgewater against Tampa Bay. He has been really a check down game managing quarterback without Drew Brees, really relying on the defense against Seattle and against the Dallas Cowboys. And then I'll throw one more at you. Chase Daniel against Oakland. I expect to see some of the same as Bridgewater has been doing. Probably a lot of David Montgomery, who saw 21 carries last time out. So there's the table set for you. The 4 guys I have written down doesn't mean I have much interest in them, but of all the guys under 6K, I'd say tepid interest at best, and maybe just a couple of them. Who do you like below the 6K mark?
Yeah, I have 2 guys written down below 6K as potential maybes, and it's Philip Rivers and Andy Dalton. Dalton, I mean, the biggest concern is, does the guy have time to throw in a game?
How bad is that line, man?
It's terrible. That's the concern there. Is this is as good of a matchup as it gets for a quarterback in the league, and you still don't feel confident because every single week so far they've lost a lineman. They came into the year down 2 to 3 linemen on that line, so it's just very scary. But still a nice spot at the price point for Dalton. Philip Rivers is like a maybe because I want to see what this Denver secondary looks like. They just lose Bradley Chubb. They haven't had Bryce Callahan. Kareem Jackson's been banged up a little bit. So depending on what that secondary looks like come Sunday morning, I'll be potentially getting to more Philip Rivers. But yeah, you said it, below $6,000 is kind of a wash. And it's a shame because if quarterbacks were healthy, there'd be some really nice spots like Sam Darnold against the Eagles, Mitch Trubisky against Oakland. Those would be nice spots for the price tags that those players would be at. But I have no interest in Luke Falk. I have really no interest in Chase Daniel, like you said, going to be more of a check down player. That's what we saw last week. I think he keeps players in that offense viable, but himself not so much. So yeah, below $6,000. Maybe Joe Flacco seems a little bit interesting if you want to go all the way down, just because the Chargers keep getting more banged up. I mean, Ingram left that last game with an injury. Secondary's banged up, but as long as Casey Hayward is healthy and Desmond King, I'm probably not going to be targeting Joe Flacco against 2 of the better cornerbacks and the best slot cornerback in the league. So yeah, for me, it probably stays above 6K. And it'll really come down to, for Andy Dalton, do we see Michael Jordan, a lineman, come back this week, get healthier? And really what that overall line looks like if they do any reshuffling, kind of a concern, but it can't get much worse.
Yeah, no question. That is what I wanted to ask you, too. The Philadelphia Eagles defense has been the run defense is elite. Yeah. Their pass rush should be better than it is. I think it will improve. The secondary, Sal, it is god awful. I mean, they allowed 370 yards to Case Keenum in week 1, 310 to Matt Ryan, who's looked nothing like himself. Well, kind of like himself, but 310 yards to Ryan, 201 to Stafford, nothing great there. And then 414 to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's been really bad. Is there any way you could make an argument for Luke Falk in a game that we would definitely expect the Jets to be playing from behind? Because look, it scares me, no question, but there's that devil on my shoulder saying, hey man, this could work, dude. Have you seen the Eagles secondary? And they're 14-point favorites. Jets have a 15.75 implied total. It's ugly, no question. The only question here is, will he have to, and by the way, I don't think Le'Veon Bell is going to have any room to run, right?
Yeah.
They have really done a good job of sealing off running backs. 77 rushing yards to Green Bay, 86 to Detroit, 57 to Atlanta, and 28 to Washington. And my guess is most of those rushing yards to Green Bay came to Aaron Rodgers. So that's a long way of asking, 46 to 77. Can you make it a justification for Luke Falk?
Yeah, so right now I'm going to say no, but if it was like anybody, if it was Chase Daniels in this spot, I would probably justify it a little bit more. It's just tough for me. I guess in like Millie Maker lineups, that's something that you might want to have some exposure to if you're entering a lot, but right now I don't have interest there. But yeah, you touched on it. Like this secondary, they came in without Ronald Darby. During the game, Sidney Jones gets hurt. During the game, Maddox gets hurt.
Yep.
They just continue to drop like flies. Somebody who didn't play a ton of snaps for them, but I think at least I thought I saw him passing. They sent away, I think Eifert was it, to the Falcons. Somebody wasn't playing a ton of snaps, but another defensive back down there. So yeah, it's a secondary that is playing similar to last year with like fourth, fifth, sixth string options at cornerback. But it's just really tough for me to want to get to Luke Falk, especially when I do think wide receivers are in a good spot. Robbie Anderson's in a good spot. Crowder's in a good spot. It's just a matter of, how much, I guess, just data and sample have we seen of Luke Falk. And it's been somewhat of, in just 1.5 starts, somewhat of definitely disappointment if you had hopes in him, but also more of like a game manager type role. So Eagles defense is something that I would probably have more interest in there. But yeah, it's as good of a spot as it probably gets on the entire slate. And that's even factoring in the Bengals and their secondary.
Yeah, no question. And I will say this much. I don't expect Le'Veon Bell to have much room in the run game, but I wouldn't be surprised if he saw double-digit targets again. Eagles ranked 28th in DVOA against pass-catching running backs this year. It's really just a matter of whether you want to pay for Le'Veon Bell or not, which allows us to make our transition to running back. Sal, you mentioned before we got started that basically all of the elite running backs are on a single slate. Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott. I'll even throw David Johnson against Cincinnati into the mix. Like, there is a lot to talk about here. Dive right into it, man. What do we have above? Well, you know what? I'm gonna include David Johnson at 7,500. So we'll go with David Johnson and up. That's 1, 2, 3. That's 5 running backs on this slate.
Yeah, so those 5 right there, that's the range. I mean, you have Melvin Gordon coming back as well. You have Aaron Jones potentially in a sole backfield. But that's the exact range where you have to make decisions this week. I mean, if you're entering a ton of lineups, probably right now it seems to me just getting exposure to a lot of them in sort of a balanced way. I like Zeke the most. The Tyron Smith news is a little bit concerning, of course. Unlikely to play this week against Green Bay. We saw what the Eagles and really Jordan Howard did last week. Miles Sanders on somewhat limited touches. Had a great game as well. If you factor out sort of Carson Wentz's like 6 carries for 13 yards, or they call it carries, they were running for like 6 yards a clip on the Packers defense. Really felt the blow of not having Martavius Adams out there on the rush defense. Obviously, no Mike Daniels all year now with the Lions. So if Adams is going to be out again for them and not really playing for the foreseeable future, yeah, there's obvious concerns on this Packers run defense where really Kenny Clark is the main run stop, but just guard Kenny Clark with one of the better offensive lines in the league. So Zeke stands out. Also really encouraging to see him play 97% of the snaps in a game that it was close. There was always rumors the first 3 weeks of this Cowboys schedule is pretty soft. A game that was close, we saw Tony Pollard step on the field for 2 snaps in the whole game. We saw Zeke get involved in the receiving game. So right now I'm kind of keying in on Zeke, but man, is it close. Dalvin Cook is right there as well in a Giants spot. You talk about the squeaky wheel, but in a matchup against the Giants where everything seems to be in a good spot for them, in a neutral to positive game script for him, a much easier matchup than last week where he got involved in the passing game last week. And he still was able to have a good game. So this whole top range is it seems so difficult to parse through. Zeke stands out for me right now as the guy I want to get to, but you have Johnson and McCaffrey tied for the amount of routes run at a running back position so far. McCaffrey obviously always in play, but with the price point creeping up, he's probably still $1,000 too cheap. He touched the ball 37 times last week. So I kind of, if I had to rank it like very early right now, in terms of interest to getting to players in a GPP, say, it's probably these 5 for me would be Zeke, McCaffrey, Cook, Johnson, and Kamara. And it hurts to say that because Kamara is in such a good spot as well.
Here's the thing, though. I was thinking that earlier, and then I just started to dig into it. Pretty amazing. Check this out, man. The Bucs, according to Pro Football Focus, rank number 1 in run defense. According to Football Outsiders, they rank number 2 in run defense DVOA. And I think they rank 4th in DVOA against pass-catching running backs this season. That's pretty wild. And if you remember, they held Christian McCaffrey to basically no rushing yards, I think 39. Gurley and company were held to 28 rushing yards. Gallman and Barkley, 72. And then 98 for San Francisco in week 1. But early on through 4 weeks, this Bucs run defense has been really good.
Yeah, and we saw that trend start to happen like middle of last year. They were getting picked on through the air, and people just were assuming they were right on the ground.
Because you could throw for 400 yards against them with ease.
Exactly. And then, I mean, Vita Vea is maybe the best top 5 defensive lineman right now against the run in the league. He's just been fantastic, kind of just the anchor of that defensive line. And yeah, it's a tough matchup. I didn't know the DVOA stat against the pass catching back because Kamara is clearly, I mean, just with the injuries on their wide receivers right now, Austin Carr's a wide receiver 3, not touching the ball in 2 weeks. Like Kamara is going to be as high as he's ever been as the wide receiver, potentially 1.
Third, by the way, third in in DVOA against pass catching running backs. Wow. I think I said 5th.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So yeah, I think I would stand on Kamara being the guy that I want to get the least of, especially easier when he's priced up a little bit more. But man, is it hard to kind of parse through? This is something all week I'll be looking at and really trying to set exposures that I feel comfortable about not being too underweight on these guys, because it's going to be really easy to happen. And this is just 5 running backs.
I'm not even going to emphasize anything you said on Elliott because you hit on all of it, Sal, and I agree with all of it. It's funny because Ezekiel Elliott has been underwhelming if you've paid for him every week this year, right? Like, we can agree on that, but they didn't need him against Miami. Washington, he was pretty solid. And New Orleans, I have a ton of respect for that defense. They made life tough. It is interesting, though, how much Dak Prescott struggles when they can't get that run game going. I mean, we
saw it. Yep.
Yeah, we've seen it quite a bit, especially during the suspension. But Dalvin Cook, let's just spend a minute here on Dalvin Cook. I wasn't surprised last week that he wasn't efficient, but he still had 19 fantasy points. Like, dude still had 6 for 35 through the air on 8 targets. He still scored on the ground. I mean, he's easily one of the best running backs in the league right now. He deserves to be at this price point. I mean, if the fact that he's priced above Elliott to me is not shocking, and it's not even erroneous. I think it's right. Or not right, but I think it's very justifiable against this New York Giants team. And I mean, it's only going to get easier for him this week coming into to MetLife Stadium to face a team that, sure, just blew out Washington, but who really takes that seriously? The Redskins are just an atrocious football team. I mean, man, how do we not look at Dalvin Cook here and say, all right, the Giants defense has been run defense, has been okay, but assuming the game flow is what we would expect, as Vikings being touchdown favorites on the road, Dalvin Cook, despite the wide receivers complaining about the volume, should still get a ridiculous amount of touches in this one.
Yeah, and so first off, yeah, that run defense has been like middle of the pack and better than expected right now. The line for Dalvin Cook in terms of his offensive line is right now second best in adjusted line play on the slate. So you like to see that. He's facing some of the highest 8-man boxes, but it hasn't really mattered all that much throughout the season, and it's something that you expect. Last week, we did see Kirk Cousins open it up a little bit more and throw more. So Thielen coming out frustrated afterwards, like, makes sense. He wants it to be a 40-plus pass attempt team like it was last year for the majority of the season. But it was the week where Cousins throws the most. So it was kind of interesting to me to see Thielen say that after that game. But, yeah, I don't think they're going to change their whole offensive mindset, especially a game that favors probably running the ball a little bit more. Dalvin Cook's been so good. Right now he ranks as the number 1 running back on Pro Football Focus for his grades, 56% success rate. And so far he's averaging 18 touches a game. And yeah, we saw him get involved in the receiving game. So even if they are going to throw instead of 28 times with Cousins and something gets just translated through to the offense from Thielen's complaints, if he throws 35 times, you're probably seeing 2 more targets there for Cook. So I don't know if it actually pulls that much away from him in a negative aspect. It's just a really great spot overall. And the price point for him, similar to a lot of these top end running backs, is probably like $500 underpriced.
Yeah. And the 2 games that Cousins thrown more than 30 passes, they've lost. The 2 games where he hasn't thrown at all, they've won. But of course, that is because they got out to an early lead in 2 of them, and we're down early in both of these. Except well, I guess not down by much against Chicago. Definitely down 21-0 against the Green Bay Packers. Let's move along here. Take a look at a few of these other guys. Leonard Fournette, had been awful this season and then busted out with a huge game. Yeah, Alex Awesemo had mentioned on the NFL Deep Dive on Sunday morning that, while Fournette hasn't been great, the guy is just on the field so much of the time that it makes him viable, right? Like getting basically every single touch out of the backfield. For a running back to have played 240 of 253 offensive snaps this season is really something you don't see often. That's 95% of the snaps. It's him and McCaffrey that are doing that, and really nobody else. So while the matchup, you look at it and say, all right, well, it's okay. It's really not. I mean, it's not, but he's going to be on the field for so much of this game that I think it's worth discussing. And then I wrote down Joe Mixon against Arizona just because really the only way they moved the ball at all was when Mixon broke off a few nice runs. I mean, there were 2 drives where Mixon was moving the ball on every carry, and then Dalton would drop back and lose 15 yards on a sack, and then you have to abandon it. And then they pulled Mixon in the fourth quarter in a game that was already lost. So in that 6K range, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so right now in the 6K range, Fournette's the main guy that I've starred. Yeah, you mentioned it. He had a breakout game. He's averaging right now 24 total opportunities per game, almost 6 targets a game, 18 touches on the ground. The snaps are just all his. There's obvious concerns like there were coming into that game. His line right now is the second worst on the slate in adjusted line play. He's getting stuffed on 27% of his carries. So finally breaks out last week in a matchup where they didn't have any Wolf on the defensive line for the Broncos. Chubb gets hurt during that game, so a softer defense than expected. But the main thing with Fournette right now is he saw a ton of red zone attempts last week because they were actually moving the ball. He has 10 on the season now, and he's still not getting in the end zone. So at the end of the season, we're not going to be sitting here thinking he has 0 to 2 to 3 touchdowns. He's probably going to end up with over 5 touchdowns. So that's the spot that's keeping me intrigued. Yes, he had his big blow-up week, but he still hasn't found the end zone for a guy you would expect at the beginning of the year to have probably an 8-touchdown season. So that's something that's still keeping me, and obviously the success last week, but keeping me kind of really pulled into getting to Fournette this week is he's going to score touchdowns, and they're going to start piling up. Similar to just what you think about Julio. The whole first, 3 quarters last year, he scores 3 at the end of the year. Now all he's doing this year is scoring touchdowns. Yeah. It's something that's going to come with variance for good players, and especially when you have this much opportunity. After that, in the 6K range, I right now don't have anybody starred. I think the days of Austin Eckler are probably gone with Gordon back, although I think he'll be on the field as a receiver a lot. The matchup for James Conner is interesting to see what the Baltimore defense comes in at in terms of their health. We just saw Chubb have a huge game, rip off some big runs against them. But right now, not start is an interest for me. I do think that Mixon and Tyler Boyd are probably the best bet to move that offense. But again, the offensive line is just a concern. I want to see what happens with Jordan and other linemen in terms of if they're going to be healthy for this game. So for me right now in the sole 6K range, it's just Fournette that I have starred.
All right. Let me ask you though, just with someone like Joe Mixon, it has not been a pretty start to the season, even a little bit. As a matter of fact, it's been quite heinous. But Arizona this season, 28th in run defense, which to me doesn't come off as a huge surprise. You look at how they perform on Football Outsiders in run defense DVOA. They are also, I think, bottom 10. Do you think Mixon can bounce back in this game at home in a game where they shouldn't get blown out and he shouldn't get pulled off the field? Or is this a stay away spot for you?
Yeah, I think, he should perform and he should have every right to. Right now, it's probably a stay away, but as the week goes on, I'm just going to monitor the health of that line because, this is such a good matchup, and it has been for probably 2 years now. Just coming into this one, last year they were giving up 32 points a game to the running back position. This year so far in the mid-20s. So it's a spot where I'm probably staying away a little bit. It was good to see Mixon break away in terms of opportunities from Bernard. They came into last night on the field the same amount of the snaps, 102 apiece. Broke away a little bit last night, probably getting a little healthier as well. But for right now, it's sort of a stay away spot. The success rate is completely down, and a lot of that is due to line play.
Yeah, and also that was, if you looked at yesterday's game or watched it, which was really difficult. So credit to anyone who toughed it out. Joe Mixon essentially saw almost all of the work in the third or through the third quarter. I don't think, and I'm going to check this out right now, I'm pretty sure that in the fourth quarter he was basically, all but benched, and not benched because he did anything wrong, but because why keep him out there? Just let me see here. Unless you have it pulled up already, I don't think I do.
No, I don't even have any of the snap counts or anything because I was waiting on them to come out.
Yeah, so I don't know, but I do know for sure that most of the work late in that game went to Gio Bernard. So let's see here. Okay, so he had a carry at the 15-minute mark, or so 1 second gone in the fourth, then 2.5 minutes, then 3 minutes gone in the fourth quarter. Then he didn't touch the ball for the final 12 minutes of the game, right? That's pretty significant because in any other spot you're seeing 20 carries there for Gio Bernard. Meanwhile, and here, check this out. And this is honestly the reason that I am more interested in Gio or in Mixon than most. Bernard touched the ball once in the first half, and it was a pass. It was caught for 11 yards. He didn't touch the ball again until the fourth quarter, where he saw 6 looks. So basically completely abandoned the run game. Gio Bernard came in because they were playing from behind. They're 5-point favorites here against the Cardinals. Sorry, 3.5-point favorites. They have a 25.5 over implied implied point total. So I do think if there was a game where Joe Mixon goes off, this is it. Will it happen? I don't know. Is he fully healthy? I don't know, but I do think he'll be very low owned.
Yeah, early in the week, I think you're talking me more into Joe Mixon now. I'm liking everything you're saying. Yeah. Everything you said is great. And the fact that he had 19 total touches, 20 opportunities, and pretty much doesn't play the fourth quarter, coming home now as a favorite, that's things that are probably going to skew for me during the week.
What do you think about the low range here, Sal?
So just looking at the low range of running backs right now, I really don't have any interest. We talked about Aaron Jones right there in the high 5K range. I have interest there. I think that it's interesting for Sony Michel, seeing him touch 17, I believe, out of 19 running back touches after not really having much work, still playing less than 50% of the snaps, but a favorable matchup against Washington. And then Wayne Gallman, again, in a favorable spot, or maybe not a favorable spot in terms of matchup, but overall usage. 60% of the snaps when he was on the field, though, they were a lot of just overall targets. So the guy's pretty much catching a ball 1 out of every 10 snaps in his career, which is just, it's elite running back usage there, and he's a serviceable running back on the ground. Sort of had a Saquon role outside of the overall snap. So someone that I have slight interest in moving forward, but other than that, not much. I'll say Devonta Freeman kind of got open and was doing things in the receiving game for Atlanta, but that's a game that was heavily skewed by Matt Ryan throwing 50-plus times, and he didn't do anything on the ground. So I would say in the below 6K range, it's Aaron Jones, Sony Michel, and Gallman. All of those guys, slight interest, but really below it, I think it's sort of a weaker slate. James White's always somebody who's in play for me for GPPs, but other than that, not much. I'll say Ronald Jones had a ton of work in the second half of that last game and really broke away. He had 50% of the snaps, but relative to other weeks, it was probably the biggest breakaway. But you mentioned it earlier, New Orleans run defense is probably one of the more underrated units in the league dating back to mid last year.
Yep. He outsnapped Barber 36-19 last week. It's pretty encouraging. His last 2 weeks, he's got 33 carries for 150 yards and a touchdown. 2 receptions on 2 targets for 53 yards. Been very effective in the passing game when he's, scarcely used. Barber has 67 yards on 22 carries. He scored, but he has two receptions on 3 targets for 7 scoreless yards. Ronald Jones has certainly outplayed Peyton Barber over the last couple of weeks. I personally think we're going to see this continue to trend in that direction because, one, you didn't draft Ronald Jones to be a backup behind, arguably the worst starting running back in the league. And number 2, Peyton Barber's just not very good. But with all that said, and I mentioned it earlier, you mentioned it, I think right now too, the Saints run defense is not bad. And we've seen them really slow down some good running backs. So it's a tough spot. I think I'll keep him in on the radar for weeks going forward, but probably stay away from Jones this week. Just a couple other things to mention. Number one, David Montgomery with Chase Daniel at the helm. My assumption is that he gets a lot of work this week. I think you're going to want to and need to use him just to take pressure off of Chase Daniel. It could be that Tariq Cohen gets a lot of work as an extension of the run game, as we saw with Jalen Samuel and James Conner yesterday. That's possible. But I definitely think there is an avenue for Montgomery to have a lot of success. He's played almost 70% of the snaps in back-to-back weeks, and he is clearly now the featured back in the run game, at least. Efficiency been modest to say the least, but if he and Oakland's run defense also, to be fair, has not been bad. That's been like one of the only strengths on the D. But if you're thinking that Montgomery gets upwards of 20 carries, you can make an argument, at least I could make an argument for him there in a game that they probably win.
Yeah, and he's coming off of just so far a season high in snaps, like you said, and Tariq Cohen not playing majority of the snaps even this year. And then another thing to note is after week one, concerns of a three-headed backfield or whatever it might be. Mike Davis, 2% of the snaps last week and then doesn't take the field this past week. So like you said, really molding into a true just kind of every down role with Tariq Cohen still kind of getting snaps in the slot. So yeah, Montgomery's kind of a sneaky spot there at 5,200, especially if they use him more in the passing game with a backup quarterback taking the helm.
For sure. And I don't know how Jalen Samuel's going to be used. You mentioned Conner earlier. If they're both featured out of the backfield like that, it could be interesting. Something I mentioned earlier or before the season started, I was pretty adamant about, and it's coming to fruition to keep in mind going forward. This is now a backfield in Philadelphia that is Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. Everyone was worried about Clement and Smallwood and Sproles. Sproles played only 11% of snaps, didn't even touch the ball last week. Howard and Sanders, it's going to be a two-headed monster going forward. I don't think I'm on them this week, but I just wanted to point that out. It's in the notes. And the last one here, I want your take on it, Sal. Why is Houston not using Duke Johnson more, even though he's on the field for like 70% of snaps last week? This guy's averaging 6.3 yards per carry. He has long runs of 40, 32, and 19. He's averaging 10 yards per reception, but he's only targeted three times, and one time over his last 3 weeks, while Carlos Hyde garners 5 targets last week. I mean, dude, this is baffling to me that a guy that's easily been your most efficient skill player is just going completely overlooked, even though he's on the field.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've been saying that since like week one. He finally, maybe we're seeing a little bit of a turn of a tide in terms of being used more, but he's one of PFF's top graded running backs. He's always up there in terms of elusive rating. He makes extra yards out of nothing. And yeah, they continue to give it to Carlos Hyde, which in Hyde's defense through 2 or 3 weeks, he actually looked as good as he's probably ever looked in a 2 to 3 game stretch of his career. But yeah, Duke Johnson needs to be used more, especially when you just take into account like their main concern for 2 years, similar to Andrew Luck at the beginning of his career, is keeping your quarterback in the pocket and protected. And when that kind of breaks down, having a quick, elusive running back to throw the ball to is like gold. And you have that and you're just not using it. It's completely mind-boggling to me. As the years go on, it just seems as if like Bill O'Brien and this staff in general is just becoming more and more of just what I thought was good coaches to just being donkeys.
No, you're absolutely right. On a team that cannot protect their quarterback, the thought that they wouldn't try to get the ball to Duke Johnson out of the backfield to me is baffling. But what are you going to do? I do though think that he could be a good tournament play because they need to do something different, Sal. Like they need to make adjustments here, and maybe featuring Duke Johnson more could be the reason. He's probably the cheapest he's going to be all season. So yeah, I just wanted to throw him out there. Anything else to add on this position?
No, that's all. I guess one note is that just Buffalo's backfield's a mess. TJ Yeldon out snaps Frank Gore and Devin Singletary probably coming back, but nothing in terms of plays. I think Josh Jacobs has been actually very effective when he touches the ball, but just a brutal matchup versus the Bears.
Oh, and quickly, it's early in the week, but what do you project to be the backfield workloads for Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler?
Yeah, from all the talk is that Melvin Gordon's going to come right back into a role. I do think Eckler stays on the field, especially depending on what the injuries look like. So Inman gets hurt again. I expect Mike Williams to be back. Travis Benjamin, not sure what that status looks like. If one of those guys miss, I wouldn't be shocked if Eckler's lining up in the slot a lot, as he did last week a ton, and staying on the field. So in terms of the backfield usage, I think Gordon's going to probably dominate it, 75-25, but that doesn't mean Eckler is only on the field 25% of the snaps.
All right. Talking wide receivers now. Before we do, though, I want to let everybody know that Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports is the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. They got the 350K baller this week, 35K to first, $10 to enter, MME on that one. And, of course, a bunch of quality single entry contests, the $1, 25K, 4K to first guaranteed contest if you're working with a smaller bankroll, and some zero management fee contests as well, meaning everything that is paid in by the player gets paid back out to the player. And you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, as good as cash to be used to play, win, and then withdraw on the site. All you have to do is go to awesemo.com. We're going to change this link now that baseball's over, but go to awesemo.com and go to the MLB tab. You'll see the Spotlight Hitters article. It's free, and the link is right at the top. Maybe one of our guys can post it here in chat if it works. They always tell me I can't, but you know what? They're more savvy than I am with some of this stuff, and maybe they can find a workaround. But anyway, that's it. Go to awesemo.com, click on the MLB tab. You'll see the free Spotlight Hitters article. And when you click that link and sign up, you get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points upon depositing. They are the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. Okay, Sal. Hopkins, Jones, Adams, Allen, Mike Evans, all of these guys at the top. Evans has had a very tough time against Marshawn Lattimore in the past, and justifiably so. Keenan Allen going up against the Denver defense that has looked nothing like what most of us would have predicted. Devontae Adams, we'll see what his practice participation looks like. Didn't practice yesterday with turf toe. We'll see about today. And then Julio and Hopkins. Hopkins coming off 3 really underwhelming performances. Teams are doubling him. Deshaun Watson is getting crushed in the pocket. And then Julio Jones, a rough performance, but all in all, he's been good. So there it is. Go ahead and run with this for the top-tier wide receivers.
Yeah, the top-tier wide receivers, I think I'm going to have, especially if my interest in Watson rises throughout the week, I'm going to have a good amount of DeAndre Hopkins. Still getting targets, still getting air yards, just really more so on his quarterback play than him getting any sort of separation being the issue. And I'm just not expecting that to hold up all that much. The only concern I would say is that for Hopkins, it's a beneficial matchup for him in terms of one-on-one. But if you see if what happens last week in terms of blanket coverage is what Tennessee was running out there against Julio and Ridley, then that's a concern. So right now Hopkins is listed as a second tier option for me because we saw blanket coverage on both Ridley and Julio pretty much, and they were just saying throw the ball to Austin Hooper and Sanu, and that's exactly what you got, loads of yards and catches for those guys underneath. So we'll see moving forward if that changes for me a little bit. So right now, Hopkins, I'd have more interest in Julio in, but I have more interest in Keenan Allen, whose price comes down. Yes, Melvin Gordon's back there, but their wide receiver core is just absolutely just brutal right now.
Completely depleted.
Yeah, Mike Williams should be back, I would say, since he was somewhat close, but we'll see as the week goes on. Inman gets injured. Benjamin was really never going to play last week, so we'll see how that trends this week. But regardless, even if those guys play, you're still probably projecting more times than not here Keenan Allen for a good workload in targets. The only concern is they're beat up in the secondary, Denver. But if Chris Harris Jr. stays on Keenan Allen, that's a major concern because we actually saw Chris Harris Jr. just absolutely take away Devontae Adams, which not many cornerbacks can do that against Adams. We've seen him have a good year this year, and he's not just like in years past a dominant slot corner. He's been primarily shadowing guys on the outside. So we'll see if he moves back into the slot against Allen, but I think it's a nice spot at the price point. But yeah, that upper range right now on wide receiver, I just from just doing some just dummy crunches overall, I'm not getting to, and it's really because of the upper range at running back. It's hard to justify paying up for those guys, especially when you see the matchups that some of them have. You mentioned Lattimore against Mike Evans. That's a concern. Mike Evans or Lattimore coming into last week was performing poorly on the year, but then he shuts down Amari Cooper. So it just goes to show you what a small sample size could really do in terms of swaying your opinions. So yeah, the top end of wide receiver right now, I'm just not getting a ton of overall interest, and it's really going to come down to the amount of times that I probably get their quarterbacks for stacking reasons.
Yeah, by the way, Chris Harris Jr. and Keenan Allen both, either covering or running the routes out of the slot just below 60% of the time. So if this is a shadow game, it's tough for me because on one hand, Rivers loves Keenan Allen. and he's still going to look his way. On the other hand, it's a really tough matchup. So I think definitely not a stay away spot, but a tough one. And hopefully the volume will push him over the top. So one more time, rank your top guys above 7K. There's 5 of them. You don't have to rank all 5, just your top 2.
Yeah, I would say the top 2 that I would get to this week, above 7K, are what those 5 guys there. I don't expect Adams to play, so I would say Keenan Allen and probably Julio Jones, just due to Hopkins probably going to get blanketed.
All right. In the 6K range, Chris Godwin coming off a huge game, Adam Thielen coming off a complain game, and he's been really disappointing this year. I mean, his one big game came because he rushed in a touchdown from the 1-yard line. Michael Thomas against Tampa Bay. This to me is a very, very attractive spot if you're Michael Thomas, because even though Teddy Bridgewater has struggled with getting the ball downfield, he has still found plenty of ways to get the ball to Michael Thomas. I mean, Michael, what is he coming off on Sunday
9
night?
for 95 or something.
Yeah, 9 for 95, caught all 9 of his passes. He's a PPR beast. I think his ceiling is lowered, but I don't know if his floor has really gone anywhere, Sal. So just looking at some of the 6K guys, I think it's pretty deep here. Not in love with a couple of them I really like, but guys like Godwin, Boyd, Thomas, Thielen, Edelman, Diggs, Fitzgerald. What do you like here?
Yeah, I think Michael Thomas is the one that stands out. I surprised by the price point and how low he is. Look, Michael Thomas in his career, he's not a deep threat. He's a guy who will run like 10-yard routes and just eat up your defense by
just way too cheap.
Running. Yeah, he's way too cheap. And he's a guy that, he'll be somewhat touchdown dependent in terms of his ceiling because of that. But you saw it last week. The guy catches everything thrown to him because he just gets open in the short range, which is perfect for a quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater. But really, the Saints in general, that's how Drew Brees has been for the last 2 years, not throwing that often deep down the field. So, yeah, Michael Thomas against a bottom 8 right now, Tampa Bay secondary, in a spot where we already kind of talked about how stout this run defense is. It makes sense to get quick passes out to Michael Thomas and just really any week. So I think he's $1,000 probably too cheap. And he's my favorite 6K play. He might be my favorite just wide receiver play when you factor in the price and the matchup. Tyler Boyd right there at 6,500. I'm actually somewhat intrigued by the price point, but a little bit more excited. I thought he had a fantastic matchup last night, and we just saw everything break down because they couldn't get any time to throw the ball to him.
Ball out.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers were going to guard him, and they did for a third of that game with a linebacker in the slot. And now you get another favorable matchup against Arizona, who's just leaking points to pass catchers, tight ends, wide receivers. So I actually like Tyler Boyd. I think you might see suppressed ownership because Michael Thomas is very close in price and also coming off of a bad game in prime time. I like that spot. And I would say Julian Edelman's in a nice spot against a Washington secondary. Edelman and Gordon in the same price range. I think the Patriots this week make for interesting stacks because the favorable spot for them overall, obviously no AB, and what seems to be more 11 personnel without James Devlin being back there. So I would rank it Michael Thomas far and away, then Tyler Boyd, Edelman, and actually I'll put Gordon above Edelman for the 6K range.
What do you make of this, by the way? So let me pull it up here. I lost it. Yeah, MJ Stewart, Carlton Davis, and Vernon Hargraves all have sub 60 defensive grades on Pro Football Focus. That's not exactly what you want for guys coming in to defend someone like Michael Thomas.
Yeah, exactly. This spot is just so good. Any format, any type of tournament, I expect him to carry heavy ownership. But like we've been saying really every single week, especially with Randone on Saturdays, is if it's a good player in a good spot and they have ownership, you don't have to just fade it.
Right. All right, so let's work our way down a little bit. Actually making pretty good time today, I've got to say. Feels like we've covered a lot. We know Cincinnati struggled pretty much everywhere. It looks like Christian Kirk will not play this week. If I had to guess, the word is that Cliff Kingsbury basically said it's very possible that he's going to miss time. It's an ankle injury. Now you've got Larry Fitzgerald, who has been pretty solid to start the year. His production has gone down from weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 consistently, but he's still getting targeted. He's still getting looks in the red zone. And now he's probably going to be in a situation where his competition on his own team is, Damiere Byrd and Keyshawn Johnson. To me, this could be a massive target type game for Fitzgerald. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about the other receivers on this team against Cincinnati in the event that Kirk doesn't play, because I don't think he will.
Yeah, so that ankle injury or whatever they're going to call it for Kirk, it looked really scary. So I would lean there right with you that probably trends towards doubtful not playing. So yeah, Larry Fitz is the guy who kind of jumps in again in a really good matchup. What you have on this secondary for Cincinnati is pretty much like Darius Phillips is playing well for a guy who is just not on the field all that much though. So when it comes into guys on the field a lot at cornerback position in the secondary, it's terrible. It's Dre Kirkpatrick, it's Jackson III, it's guys that are out there and really just not covering anybody. BW Webb, every time you hear that name, it's usually in a highlight reel getting burnt. So yeah, I like the spot for Larry Fitzgerald. I have written right now, if Kirk is out, second best 6K option behind Thomas is what I have on Larry Fitzgerald for a guy running out of the slot, going to see double-digit targets, going to see loads of red zone targets too in a fast-paced game. Not much to kind of say to get away from him. He's already seen, I believe, 6 red zone targets this year. So Fitzgerald at 6K is completely fine. And yeah, this is actually interesting. A guy in just some random person on Twitter pointed out that the fact that Michael Crabtree was dropped and you weren't going to have Damiere Byrd playing actually was better for Trent Sherfield. And I didn't see how. I don't know why he would have jumped Keyshawn Johnson, but I don't know if there's something to that or not. But yeah, Trent Sherfield saw more snaps by a wide margin than Keyshawn Johnson last week with Byrd out. I would expect, and we'll have to see what happens this week. Byrd was out early last week, so monitor that. If he's in, he'll be on the outside. I would probably expect Keyshawn to move into the slot. I'm not exactly sure how they'll do this because they've been running just so many two-slot wide receivers. So that's something that I probably have to look into is just how many guys have ran through the slot outside of Kirk and outside of Fitzgerald, because that's where Kirk's been living so far this year is in the slot with Damiere Byrd on the outside and Keyshawn in 4 wide receiver sets. So if Byrd is back, yeah, slight interest for a guy, probably he averages 6 targets a game, but I really would have interest in who's running opposite the slot in all of their 4 wide receiver sets with Fitzgerald. I'm not sure if you know that or not, but I think that's something that's going to be really important because they're pretty much taking over the Christian Kirk role.
Right. And interestingly, Christian Kirk runs a lot of his routes out of the slot too. It's tough to say. Here's what we do know, that he's played 93% of the offensive snaps for the Cardinals this year.
Yeah.
That leads the team. Obviously, Fitzgerald's at like 92%, but still. Taking Christian Kirk off the field, again, Kingsbury said that it's very possible he misses time. You mentioned didn't look like a very nice injury. If I had to lean towards him playing or not, I'd say no. But it also comes down to Damiere Byrd being out because his snaps had been insane as well, right?
Yeah.
If he played this last game, he would have had basically, presumably, 3 fewer snaps than Fitzgerald on the season. So we'll have to see. But if he is out and Kirk is out, my guess is that, Keyshawn Johnson and Sherfield, who saw, as you pointed out, 84% of snaps, get a whole lot more. And maybe Andy Isabella sees like 25-30% of snaps. But
yeah,
I think
I think that makes sense. And I just pulled up the slot performance so far through, and let me actually get it up for the entire season. So Fitzgerald and Kirk, both of them dominating the slot. And the only other guy to run snaps out of the slot, 5 of them, Damiere Byrd. So Keyshawn hasn't played out of the slot. Sherfield hasn't played out of the slot. I mean, Isabella's been on the field for like 10 snaps this year. So we don't know what to expect in this one. I would probably lean that you see maybe Sherfield in the slot and Keyshawn on the outside. Keyshawn's been such a dominant outside receiver when it comes from college and all of preseason. And if you get Byrd out and Kirk out, I would probably lean Keyshawn over Sherfield. Even though you saw the snaps higher last week, you probably see both of those guys running 80+%, just the amount of pure volume of 3 wide receiver sets. It's been the most in the league so far. But yeah, this is actually a lot more interesting. And I guess this is why early week shows are so beneficial. This is a very interesting spot depending on where the injuries line up because we haven't seen something like this year in terms of the other receivers having to run out of the slot.
Totally agree. By the way, if you look at all of the receivers this season, you're seeing receivers run a lot more balanced, over the past couple of years, like not 90% from this side. A.J. Brown and Javon Wims have run 50% of their routes from the right side. That's the second highest in the league. Keyshawn Johnson has run 90% of his routes on the right side. So if I had to guess where he's going to be lining up, let's say right side of the field, and then we can figure everything else out. But Fitzgerald's 79% in the slot, 47% from Kirk. I guess we'll see. But yeah, like you said, no one else runs any slot routes on this team. Maybe you just see like 100% for Fitzgerald in this game.
That's exactly what I would expect. And I mean, yeah, we want to kind of dive out and see who's the next guys to step up, because they're going to see role changes, opportunity, and they're cheap. But yeah, that's not to overlook that Fitzgerald, especially if that happens with no Kirk and or Bird. He's also cheap at $6,000 relative to just what he can do in this game. I mean, it's just crazy that he's been playing like 94% snaps out of the slot this year, which is absolutely nuts.
Crazy. Do you have any love for cheap guys on at wide receiver?
Yeah, I got guys named down here. So, I mean, if you're going to have Devontae out, MVS is somebody that I would have interest in. I do think Jimmy Graham's going to be more of a priority for the Packers if that happens. And it does seem like Devontae's going to miss. I think they stated it, Adam Schefter last night.
Yeah, it looks like it for sure.
Yeah, unlikely. So MVS would jump in there against a secondary for Dallas now that is down 2 safeties. And that's probably their weakest position. So if you're going to have one-on-one coverage for MVS at parts in this game with third-string safeties, that's nice, and I like to see that. It'll be interesting to see who the Packers go with on the other side. Probably Darius Shepard, if I had to guess, Drawn Miles into the slot. So MVS would be my main interest there. And then cheaper side, I will keep going back to, at least in tournaments with stacks, Will Fuller at 4,500. It seems like he's having a bad year, but after this week, that was 2 times on 60-plus yard touchdowns that he was just missed by Deshaun Watson. That completely changes somebody's season. And then mentioned earlier at the top, Auden Tate at 3,500. You have those Cardinals receivers cheap, but Auden Tate's about to step into a role if John Ross misses of kind of the John Ross role, except hybrid into a slot, sort of a Robert Woods role for Zach Taylor when he was with the Rams. So $3,500 for Auden Tate. The last 2 weeks has ran the 15 most routes in the league, or top 15. I really do like that as an actual play for either cash or GPPs if indeed John Ross is out.
All right, so let's see here. I want to see if there's anyone else. I agree. Marquez Valdez-Scantling definitely would vault himself to the top. Did you mention the Cincinnati situation? I was doing some research here.
Yeah. Auden Tate at 3,500 is probably, honestly, if you even factor in the whole 4K range, probably my favorite play in the 3 or 4K range.
Agreed. I think you're right. Philip Dorsett, had 9 targets last time out. We'll move over to tight end, but how do you break down this New England, the pass catchers for New England with, guys like James White? You mentioned that he's interesting. I do think he's interesting this week, but I'm also just not enamored with it when, you don't know what the backfield's going to look like in the passing game. But just looking at the Patriots from last week, Philip Dorsett led all receivers and tight ends with 9 targets. James White saw 10, but Dorsett only hauled in 2 of them. Usually that could be a bad sign going forward when you have plenty of options. But what are your thoughts on him down here below 5K?
Yeah, I have an X next to him. And the only reason I don't like him more is because I think there are, like Tate, just other cheaper options you can get to. And we've seen so far this year, Dorsett's seen a lot of targets, but in those games where he's seen targets, you've had Josh Gordon just be completely taken away by shadow treatments of Tre'Davious White, Xavier Howard. This week, that's probably not going to be the case. Like Josh Norman, a guy who really doesn't shadow anyways, but just been terrible this year. And there's no one else after that. So when it comes to stacks, if you want to get to a cheaper option in a New England stack, Dorsett's completely fine. He probably does see a 6 or 7 target game more times than not here. But I just prefer, and the price point is higher, but really not by much, $1,000 or so. I just prefer Josh Gordon here in a matchup where he won't be shadowed by one of the top 10 cornerbacks in the league and should have a lot more room to run.
I'm with you. Tight ends, looking at the top of the position. Oh, I did want to ask you this. If Tyron Smith is out, how does that affect your love for the run game?
Yeah, I saw it this morning. He's unlikely to play. It's something that is concerning. I guess Tyron Smith being out and wanting to see what the Packers' defensive line injuries look like, I think that was a little bit understated really throughout the week on how much they got gashed up. Was just they were battling some defensive line injuries. So I want to see what that looks like. That would be a concoction that kind of makes Zeke a little bit worse, I guess. But just the overall usage, if what we saw last week is what the Cowboys are saying, okay, now these games are competitive, these games matter a little bit more. Zeke, you're out there close to 100% of the snaps.
Right.
Then you're pretty much in line for 25 Zeke touches, and we saw him get involved in the passing game. So it's a little bit concerning. But I mean, that defensive line without Smith or with him is top 3 in the league, or offensive line, top 3, top 2 in the league. Without him, it's probably still top 10.
It's not enough to take me off of Zeke, especially that he's been involved pretty heavily in the passing game. So I'm with you. I still love him, but it's something worth monitoring for sure. All right. So no Travis Kelce, no Chiefs on this slate. You have Zach Ertz, who has, he's been fine, right? He's been fine, but he really hasn't been spectacular. You can spread the ball around a lot in Philadelphia, even with Jackson out. And when both Jackson and Alshon were out, they just literally doubled Ertz and took him out of the game, forced the ball to Mac Hollins and Nelson Aguilar. So that's an interesting way to view this. Whenever there are injuries, teams will play them differently. But it is, of course, the New York Jets, and I know you're on Carson Wentz this week, so we'll get into that. Evan Ingram in a tough matchup against Minnesota. Darren Waller has been nothing short of spectacular. Really just a PPR monster this season, but he's going to face really tough matchup, the toughest one all season by a mile. And then, well, you know what? Those are the guys above 5K. What do you have?
Yeah, I like Zach Ertz a good amount this week. I think with Jeffrey back, you'll see, and we started to see it against the Packers, just less double teams. And he's always going to be a guy who's probably the number one target for Wentz, 9.5 targets per week so far. And the thing that I think is really interesting, 6 red zone targets, hasn't converted one of them yet. That's something that's going to change for him. So a guy who's seeing 27% of the red zone target share, and he's only $6,000. If I took him off of the tight end page and put him on the wide receiver page at 6K, he'd be one of the better wide receiver plays. And I mean, that's how this guy's being utilized in this offense still. So I like Ertz a good amount. It's interesting not to see Kelce, no really high-end tight end plays, no Kittle on this page either. So Ertz is the guy out of those top-end guys that I would like. You touched on Waller. Yeah, Waller was in line for a huge day last week, 5 catches in like the first quarter, and then they just got so far ahead. They didn't pass the ball until the fourth quarter when the Colts started to come back a little bit. So really tough matchup for him, but I still expect him to see 8 to 10 targets in this game. The way he's being utilized is very, very elite right now. But for $1,000 more, I lean Ertz. Ingram is also involved in that offense. He's completely fine if you want to get to him. I just think there's a higher floor and ceiling for Ertz this week if you were to pay above $5,000 for tight end.
So something that's pretty incredible. I mean, I think I was very high on Waller coming into this season, particularly because he was being drafted so low. I'm sure you had interest in him as well. His market share of targets this year is 30%. As a tight end, 30%, right? He has 37 targets. Tyrone Williams is second with 24. Hunter Renfrow at 18. No one's even close. No one is even close. He has a red zone target in each of his last 3 games. This is what I find amazing. And I'm being 100%, just to be clear here, I probably won't get to Waller in this matchup. Is it possible? Yes, just because of the volume and the need to throw. But it is a gruesome matchup. But What's incredible too, though, Sal, is he doesn't have a touchdown on the season, and he's averaging 17 fantasy points per game.
Yeah, the guy's on pace for, I think, 130 receptions too. Obviously early, but I mean, this is the exact role we saw for Jaron Cook last year, except you have a more athletic tight end in that spot to just create more separation, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's really hard. I mean, we talked about Ertz getting double teamed when there was nobody on the outsides, but there was literally nobody on the outsides for the Eagles that game. It's really hard to try and double team a tight end like this when I guess you would say there is something on the outside in Tyrone Williams for sure, but it's just hard to scheme it to take away the middle of the field because then, if you're leaving one-on-one coverage for a guy like Tyrone Williams on the outside, that's going to then get picked apart. And we haven't seen a team need to double team Darren Waller yet this year, but the guy's just killing it in yards per route run, just absolutely picking up yardage. And like you said, once he actually starts to score touchdowns, once this team, when they're in the red zone, scores, because they're just scoring from like 50 yards out right now nonstop, the Raiders. He's going to be an absolute he's already elite, but just an absolute burner right now. Probably top 3 tight end if he keeps this up by the end of the year. And that's above guys like Kittle, which is bold to say, but that's the way he's being used.
Absolutely. And you know what else? A couple of things. The Bears pass rush ranks number 1 in the league. And I don't really know if there's anyone that would dispute them being one of the best pass rushes in football. But when you look at what's happened when Derek Carr is under pressure, he's not going to Jalen Richard. He's not going to Josh Jacobs. He's going to Darren Waller.
Yeah.
So maybe you just see this safety release valve type situation this week, and Waller gives you like 9 receptions for 50 yards. I don't see the yardage totals being huge, but I could see him once again seeing double-digit targets just based on the flow of this game.
And the price point comes down $200, and he's very easily affordable, where the guys after him on this slate are, for the most part, guys that are question marks, and you need certain scenarios to happen for them to pay off, where Waller probably sees 8 targets no matter what.
Well, I like your segue there, Sal. You've done this before. Who do you like below him, if anybody?
I have those top 3 guys. Like, actually, there's another guy. So I'll start with Delanie Walker at 3,900. I actually like this spot against a Buffalo team that is really hard on a lot of positions. Not as much on the tight end, but the main thing with Delanie Walker here is people are going to look at last week and go, "Oh, Delanie Walker. I mean, he did nothing." Yeah, that was a game script where they just put Jonnu Smith on the field, and they're 2 run blocking tight ends, and they just ran down the field the whole game.
Yeah, and then AJ Brown opened it up twice, and that was all they needed.
Exactly. Yeah, you get up early on them scoring 21 points that quick on Atlanta. It just became a Derrick Henry touched the ball 27 times on the ground game, and Delanie Walker just sat on the sideline for 30% snaps. He just wasn't needed in the whole second half. So at that price point of 3,900, coming down that much, still what I would say, AJ Brown getting the big plays, but not even on the field all that much. 3 targets is how he got the stuff done that day. Delanie Walker is still the favorite target of Mariota in the middle of the field in a matchup that is, I would say, difficult, but one where at $3,900, he's just way too cheap in my opinion. And then guys that I have slight interest in, I mean, Austin Hooper greatly benefits from 53 attempts last week and just the shadow coverage of that matchup.
Yep.
But a legitimate guy every single year in his career, increase in target share, increase in overall catch percentage, and it seems to be happening again this year.
So I've been a huge Hooper truther for the past few years for exactly that reason. Every season, targets, receptions, yards, all of them increased, almost doubling each season. Touchdowns are volatile. They will come. He hasn't seen many of them. But yeah, go ahead. I agree. He's been a guy that I've preached about just because you can't beat that uptick in volume year after year at a position that generally takes several years to really become acclimated and really, the whole maturation process at tight end takes longer than, say, running back.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Like, yeah, obviously Jimmy Graham, guys like that come in the league and smash,
right.
But for the most part, it's not like that. And yeah, I was probably for the first year or two somebody who just thought Hooper was kind of garbage, but I lived with a very strong Atlanta Falcons, very smart dude last year, and he was just showing me all this stuff. And yeah, Hooper is actually legit. So guys averaging over 8 targets per game. He's interesting to me at his price point. And then Jimmy Graham, I'm going to keep harping on only because that is like all Aaron Rodgers was looking at on those final 2 drives against the Eagles. It was Jimmy Graham nonstop. If Devontae Adams is out, like we are expecting now, I would see Jimmy Graham seeing like 6 targets in this game. But when it comes down to the red zone, more importantly, he's probably the go-to option in the red zone for the Packers if there's no Devontae Adams. We saw that he had a couple red zone targets last week in that fourth quarter when Adams wasn't out there and they couldn't get anything done. So I think at 4,300, he's a little bit interesting. Kind of concerned to see Jared Cook's overall snaps go down a little bit in that last game against the Cowboys. But at $3,400, if you're looking for a really, really cheap tight end, favorable matchup in a spot where he's still probably the 3rd option in a passing game more times than not when Teddy Bridgewater is not going to look down the field to Ted Ginn all that often. And Austin Carr has been running routes, but just not seeing any targets as a wide receiver 3. So that's the main guys. I guess Mark Andrews is definitely worth mentioning for a guy who just continues to play like 45% of the snaps. But every time he's out there, he's just running routes and they're throwing the ball to him when he's out there. It's like, it's screaming out to defensive coordinators like, oh, he's on the field. Yeah, this is where the ball is going on this play more times than not. So it's a spot where he last week was very touchdown dependent, especially on only 42% of the snaps. So I don't have as much interest in him. And I think a really interesting spot this week is Darren Waller in a difficult matchup or Mark Andrews with Minka there, somewhat difficult matchup and half the snaps.
There's a guy I'm surprised you didn't mention because of last week. His name is Tyler Eifert.
There you go.
Look, Tyler Eifert, if we can get through this game without him, suffering another season-long injury, it'll be great. Yeah. But you're the one that pointed this out. This Arizona team has been, to say they've been bludgeoned by opposing tight ends would be giving them far too much credit. It has been an absolute catastrophe for this football team. And even Will Dissly, I thought that Will Dissly would come back down to earth. I was wrong. He ended up having a pretty solid game. I'm not a big Eifert guy. I don't believe any of us are, right? And I would be if he could be healthy. If he could stay healthy, I would certainly have more interest in Eifert, because if you remember, man, he was one of the best red zone tight ends in the league when healthy. But I don't know. I look at this and I see a spot where you could make an argument for it. How often will he be on the field? That's a question. Will he get targeted? It's another question. I think he will. He has 5 targets in 3 of his first 4 games. You can do worse at tight end for a cheap guy. We don't have snap counts yet, but he's played 50% of snaps in 2 of his first 3 games. I don't know what we got last week, but yeah, I'm just throwing it out there. If there's a cheap, virtually unowned tight end this week, I may look towards Tyler Eifert just based solely on the matchup.
Yeah, he's been pretty consistent in terms of how he's done this year. He's pretty much running 20 routes a week and heavy, I would say a lot of routes in the red zone. He's seen 4 red zone targets this year, 20 routes a week for a guy who's seen 4 targets a week. So at the price point, and yeah, definitely the matchup is what's going to skew him up. Like if Tyler Eifert scores 1 to 2 touchdowns last night, he might be the highest owned play on the slate this coming week. Just people knowing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just knowing what's happening against Arizona right now at the tight end position. So we'll see. I mean, Will Dissly, yeah, he saw just a bigger spike than I thought in terms of his snaps with Nick Vannett gone. So that definitely helped him out. Tyler Eifert going to be out there for probably about 50% of overall snaps, but used more in the red zone, which is good for fantasy. Not somebody I'm on right now, but I understand why people want to get there for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to pull it up. I lost it, but here it is. So after last week, the Arizona Cardinals are still allowing 27.8 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. That is remarkable. No team is above 20. Tampa Bay at 19.6. But yeah, I mean, they're literally allowing over 100 yards per game to tight ends, 1.5 touchdowns. Can't beat it, man. So if you're looking for, a dirt cheap tight end with a lot of risk, certainly volatile, but priced where you could make an argument for it, Eifert would be my guy. I'm going to just ask you for a couple defenses, but before I do, I want to let everyone know that awesemo.com/join is where you go to sign up to get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership. All you have to do is use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word. It's at the bottom of the screen, or click up here if you're watching after we've streamed, and it'll take you right there. That's NFL Strategy as the promo code to get our ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool, all of these tools developed and used every day by Awesemo, Alex Baker himself. All of our premium articles that these guys labor over and put a ton of work into. And of course, the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, the lineup builder, and so much more. Check it out, Awesemo. Join NFL Strategy to get 50% off your first month of all access content, or check out our premium weekly pass for $3.95 a week. Awesemo.com/join. I'll show you everything you need to know so you're not diving in head first without any direction. All right, Sal, hit me with a few defenses, and then we'll get out of here for today. I'd say it's been a pretty good show. It's a good time to close it out.
Yeah, definitely. So the way I just make lineups is just get a lineup together, see what fits in at defense. I usually like home favorites unless there's an obvious spot against paying up for Miami. Sometimes I'll get there in GPPs. It's interesting. I didn't think Pittsburgh was going to be so cheap. I mean, $2,100 for a defense that's going to be facing Baltimore, who seems like, at least last week, you take away Marquise Brown deep, they become very narrow and one-dimensional. A Pittsburgh team getting healthy, I think that's good if you're looking on a cheaper end for a home defense. And then the mid-range, right around the $3,000 mark, I think there's a couple of interesting options that seem pretty good. I think that the Chargers defense, although being a little bit injured at 2,700 is fine. And then if you go up a little bit more, you can get to spots against some of these backup quarterbacks that are going to just be really favorable. So you have all the way up at the top, you're going to have New England, 4,300. I probably don't pay all the way up for a defense. I'd probably stay a little bit lower, but it's hard not to like that, seeing how bad Dwayne Haskins looked, depending on who they go with this week. I think a spot that I really like this week is probably going in tournaments more so than not is New Orleans against Tampa Bay. You just have Jameis Winston, even in a game where he looked good, he threw a pick 6, and now he's probably going to garner more ownership in this offense as a whole. So when I think about it earlier in the week, a defense that's probably underrated and in a good spot, more so than any other quarterback on the slate, really, at making mistakes. I like the Saints at 3,400. But again, on a Tuesday, for the most part, have not even broken down too much defense on my end.
Yeah, I haven't either. Honestly, I'll look for home favorites,
Yep.
teams with low totals. So I'll just throw this at you real quick before we go. And if you don't mind, it's always appreciated if you like the show, you like the content, and you want to see more and help support us here, hit us with a thumbs up, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well. It really helps us out at Awesemo and helps us continue to grow the site and the channel and continue to give free content here as we do every day. So yeah, hit that thumbs up button. It's greatly appreciated. Lowest totals, Sal. We don't have a New York and Patriots one yet, but Skins at 14.25, Jets at 15.75, Bills at 17.75, and then Raiders, Jags, and Raiders. Sorry, we do have one for the Giants. Raiders, Jags, Broncos, and the Giants are all under 20. Biggest favorite here right now is, let's see, Patriots 15-point favorites, Eagles 14, then Chargers 6, Minnesota 5.5, Texans 5. So I think paying up for defense can make sense. I'm always looking at least to see if there are cheap defenses that can give me some upside in the turnover or sack department, even if they're teams that might allow points. Certain teams are very capable of racking up turnovers and sacks, or the opposing quarterback is careless with the football, which makes life a little bit easier as well. So I'll always look for stuff like that. But as of now, it's more of the expensive teams that seem to make the most sense. Sal, before we go, where can everybody find you? Let them know if you have any final thoughts. Close us out.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at SalVetriDFS. I'm here on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 11 a.m. I also have a YouTube channel, just my name is Sal Vetri. So those are the spots that you can find me. And yeah, I thought it was a good breakdown right now in a week that seems fixated around a top end tier of running backs, but it seems like everywhere else seems to have decent depth, and we're already waiting early in the week on injuries. So keep a close eye on those. And I would say the biggest thing that I took away from last week was on Saturday, not so much watching injuries, but watching what the team does transaction wise. Do they sign somebody from, like the Chargers sign Patton, wide receiver from the practice squad, because you know that player, if they're paying him a game check, is going to have some sort of impact more times than not.
All right, that'll do it for us. Thanks as always for hanging out. Fun breakdown, Sal. We'll be back on Thursday with game-by-game breakdown, Sal Vetri and myself, Dave Lochran. I'll be back tomorrow, however, with Chris Spags talking early ownership and projections, a whole lot to get to, and we'll run it back throughout the week. Sal will be on with you Thursday and then again on Saturday, and Manny Laura, Chris Randone taking a look at lineup construction on Friday. Stick with us all week long up until Sunday here at awesemo.com. We'll see you soon.